Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to the Plus webinar series. Today, we are going to talk land activism in South Africa. My name is Boaventura Monjan from Mozambique. I am a postdoctoral researcher at Plus with focus on agrarian movements in Southern Africa. This webinar is happening in a week in which a major victory was achieved for land activists. On Monday this week, the Western Cape High Court ruled in favor of two land social movements, Reclaiming the City and Ndifuna Ukwazi. These social movements launched the Stop the Sale campaign for affordable housing on the Telsberg site. I hope I'm pronouncing it properly. In early 2016, when the Western Cape Department of Transport and Public Works tried to sell the site in Sea Point to a private school in December 2015 for 135 million rands. Land struggles and activists are organizing around land demands in South Africa, but they've generally organized separately in and around the cities, informal sectors, informal settlements, on commercial farms, among small-scale farmers, in the communal areas, and in mining-affected communities. While the enemies against whom these struggles exist appear to be united, this is neoliberal land policies and corporate power, the struggles continue to face the challenge of being spread and not sufficiently articulated. Today, we will be addressing that contradiction, reflecting on three main questions. Can alliances be built and forged across rural and urban divides? What have we learned from past attempts to do so? What is the potential now for a cross-sectoral, national-wide land movement in South Africa? To delve into these questions and topics, I'm joined today by three outstanding and respected land activists in South Africa. Mercia Andres, Director of the Trust for Community Outreach and Education and member of Inyanda Land Movement. Mercia is based in the Western Cape Province. Themba Chauke from the Secretariat of the Landless People's Movement and Slow Food Movement, joining us from Limpopo. And Ayanda Kota, an activist of the Unemployed People's Movement, as well as Inyanda National Land Movement. Ayanda is joining us from the Eastern Cape, if I'm not mistaken. Welcome to you all, and thanks for being with us today. Let's start with you, Mercia. The Reclaim the City and Ndifuna Ukwazi victory is very inspiring, yet land struggles across South Africa seem not to be talking to each other. Why is that so? What could be done to overcome this? Mercia, over to you.
So thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. I think the questions that you raise are very important, and yes, we should all be taking our hats off to the victory that's just been won by Reclaim the City in the last days. It was certainly inspiring. So I think when you consider the questions that you raise, it's important to start by making the point that we have multiple types of land holding patterns, and I think this might be part of the challenges that we face. And so land activism is varied. You have those who are struggling against evictions, and if I look at the organization that I'm part of, it is a reflection of this the challenges that we face. So here in the Western Cape, in the last months, during the COVID, actually, we had to deal with evictions from farms. Farm workers and farm dwellers were pushed off the land. We had to deal with evictions of people that have been living on municipal land that they had occupied 6 months to a year, they were evicted by the red ants. That was one form of land activism. At the same time, we had to deal with defensive struggles along the coastal districts of the country, in the Eastern Cape, in the Pondoland region, where local elites were trying to grab land for mining purposes, and also where we were seeing people's land, productive land, being used or promoted by the government for cash crops. So that's another kind of activism and struggle against land that we see. Then we have other struggles here again in the Western Cape, where people are fighting on commonage land for longer term tenures on land. So the struggles, I can go into the details of it, but we see multiple types of struggles, and at this stage, many of these struggles are very, very localized, very much in the district, in the different communities. And often, if I look at the question of evictions, we should be joining hands with urban communities, as you say, and urban campaigns. But these linkages and building the common platforms have been slow in emerging. And I think it's been slow in emerging not because there isn't a consciousness that we should be holding hands, that we should be building common platforms around these issues. I think this is part of the challenges that is being faced. I think also the fact that often, if I look at the struggles of farm workers and so on, the struggles are very isolated, and this makes the rural struggles much more challenging. How do we build the linkages even in the Eastern Cape? When the struggles in the Eastern, I'm just using the Eastern Cape as an example, or when you look at Limpopo, how do you begin to build common struggles between women who do not have security of tenure on land, who are struggling for land, and small-scale producers who have land, but perhaps not enough land. So I think one of the issues that we need to overcome is to find a common way of getting the various kinds of struggles to see the linkages and to see the common enemy, as it were, and to begin to develop common platforms that can create the space where we can begin to talk about what is a new imagination. How can we begin to think about land, access to land, control of land, ownership of land, land use in a different way. So I think these are some of the complexities that we face. So land activism is varied. The strategies are varied. You have legal strategies. But I think part of possibly what Ayanda will be discussing is that we can have very good victories in the court, but if the movement is weak and we cannot defend the gains that we've made at that level, this is also quite a big challenge. So I think that perhaps going forward in the new period, we need to begin to build the linkages amongst ourselves. We don't yet have a common platform. So you have LPM in Limpopo. We have many different associations and movements, and yet the convergence is slow. And I think this is one of the hurdles that we need to overcome. Perhaps I stop there, and we can continue as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. In fact, the convergence is low. Ayanda, I want to bring you here now. You are part of the unemployed people's movement, And as you can assert, unemployment in South Africa affects both rural and urban youth. In fact, the urban-rural divide not always makes sense in the context of South Africa, because the land question is actually the backbone of inequality in South Africa across the geographies. Building on what Marcia said, how do you see the potential for, a cross-sectoral movement in South Africa? Ayanda, over to you. Have we lost Ayanda? It seems like we have lost Ayanda. So I'm going to bring you Themba. Themba, the landless people's movement was one of those attempts that faced difficulties in the past. It seems like it's now only active in Limpopo. Correct me if I'm wrong. But LPM is also a member of a global transnational agrarian movement, which is La Via Campesina. What can you tell us about what we are discussing? What would you comment on what Marcia presented? Over to you, Themba.
No, thank you very much, Paul. LPM is not that much active only in Limpopo, it's also everywhere. Let me say where we have got active members in KZN, we have got active members in Western Cape, we've got active members in Gauteng, and let me say those 4 provinces, that's where we've got most of the active members. Though some of them are in Limpopo, LPM had its own problem before I even joined it, but I was called by LPM to become this activist as I am today. So let me tell you, I've been involved with LPM since 2011, and that's why I came to know Slow Food in 2013. But what I've come to realize is that the land question is no longer a black and white issue in South Africa. Now is between the community themselves and the government at hand. And remember, when we talk about government have got much resources legal-wise, which making it difficult for local people. I just want to give you, we've got some few cases which are going on as I speak. Now we've got a case in Gauteng, in Roodepoort, where the people are being threatened to be evicted. And the story is too complex. I mean, it's not easy to deal with even internally, because there are lots of wrongs and there are some few rights there. So that is the challenge that we're facing. So, but what I've discovered is that, I thought while I joined this movement that the struggle of land is only in urban. Because remember, in rural areas, we are living under communal land. And our struggle in rural areas, communal land is about agricultural purposes. So it's up to us as activists, how do we keep the land that we have? How do we use the land that we have to be productive? That's where you find that to keep the land in order to avoid the struggle that's going to come, you have to use it, especially for small scale farming. It's what we're doing, are pushing most in Limpopo. That is the most of the activities. That's why you see an organization like Slow Food come in. We established the 10,000 Gardens Network and all the stuff like that. But of recent, in Guyana, there's an ongoing process whereby the municipality is selling the land at a very high prices. I can say it is more than 130,000 a piece of a stand, a residential stand, of which the community are opposing, and part of that struggle. We are marching. We were supposed to be marching tomorrow, but because of the COVID that happened in the municipality, we'll be marching on Tuesday, because they said they will have opened their offices to hand over the memorandum and stand against the sale of the stand at that high prices, because the intention of selling the stand at that high price is to exclude the majority of the poor people who are living in the area, or are the residents of the area. So you find that, and the municipality also used the courts to interdict the communities from marching against it. So you can see this, how the struggle is legal struggle. That's what is affecting the communities to deal with the struggle of the land. And again, as I say that, I never thought that we're going to be having a land struggle in rural areas. You know, the land had become a commodity. You know, I was happy when the SPLOMA law, SPLOMA, Spatial Land Management Act, which was supposed to be, the land was supposed to be administered by the government, but especially by the municipality. But it turns out that the municipality does not have an interest of the people at hand. The life in rural area is whereby people depend most on agriculture, subsistence agriculture, whereby people have got cattle and other livestock, and farming. So you find that now, because the land has become a commodity, we are holding a two-sided sword, because on the other side, you find that you are trying to engage the traditional leadership, the traditional authority. Remember, the communal land is in the rural areas is under the authority of or the custodian of traditional authorities. Then you find that even then, money is very tempting. You find that people are also forgotten. So that's why you need to be engaging them to say that to find that this land should not be sold for other purposes except for agricultural purposes. So that way SPLOMA was coming, but it's still a struggle that we're having. That's how we say that our struggle now is to make sure that the land that we currently have, how do we keep it by using it for the purpose of self-sustenance. But the land struggle is still very difficult, especially legal resources we don't have as the community. And as LPM, we are a movement. Is the organization which does not have access to those funds and all the stuff like that. So it makes it difficult for us to fight independently. And I had to talk about convergence and all the stuff like that. Yes, there are spaces where we are discussing. I joined this movement while I was young, but when you are young, you'll really love more of actions than sitting and debating policies and all the stuff like that. So what I'm seeing, which is a little bit lacking in the movement as a whole, in the struggle as a whole, is actions that need to be taken on the ground. Example, South African, with the social movement, the civil societies, they've drafted very well policies that were supposed to be protecting people from the land. But the actions are not really there. So I think I will just stop here about my explanation.
Themba, thank you for your input. We will come back later to insist on some of the issues for your reaction. Let's now bring in Ayanda. Ayanda, I was saying that in fact the land question in South Africa has no geographical discrimination. Unemployment is both in urban and rural areas. Your movement, the Unemployed People's Movement, is trying to also articulate struggles that has to do with the land question. I would like to listen to your analysis on how can actually the separated struggles be interconnected, and how can you how do you see that potential and that possibility? Ayanda, over to you.
All right. Thank you. The Inyanda National Movement, Inyanda National Land Movement, we have started a process of thinking very hard on how to bridge the gap or to converge the struggles of the land in the Eastern Cape. Land is it's a plural question. In rural areas, there are struggles against the undemocratic chiefs and headmen, because the undemocratic chiefs and headmen are what we call albatross of unaccountability. There is a case which is with Legal Center for a village in Pedi, and there were cases that were Inyanda National Movement and the Kala Reserve case that was led by Galusa, people demanding to elect their chief, to say we've got a right to elect, it cannot be imposed. But again, in our discussions as Inyanda National Movement into our province is to say, yes, the chiefs and the headsmen in the rural areas are the albatross of this accountability. But again, if you look at urban areas, they are no different. They are no different at all to the political settlement that you have. I'm referring to your councillors. Despite that, many communities across South Africa have taken the struggles to say these people are corrupt, these people are not accountable, they are accountable to the party, these people have been captured, they constitute a political elite. The Unemployed People's Movement had to take the matter to court to say they ought to be dissolved because they are dysfunctional. This council have collapsed. The lives of the people, in particular the working class, is in danger. Now, I'm saying you can draw similarities between the two struggles of the urban and the rural areas. And to us as Inyanda National Movement, that was a point of convergence to say, because we understand the land to be a political question. But again, even Karl Marx himself, in 1871, with the Commune Paris, where people were able to directly elect their representative, and those representatives were subjected to the right to recall. So then Karl Marx was able to say, here is the dictatorship of the proletariat, and how the land question was organized, and it was able to speak to the safety of women as well. So I'm saying these are similarities that I am talking about of the urban experience and struggles and the rural urban struggles. But again, Inyanda National Land Movement in our province, as we have been recruiting farm workers to join Inyanda, in a conversation, farm workers have been able to say to us in Makanda and surrounding Makanda, also in rural areas, that in the discourse and in the narratives of the land reform in South Africa, no one is talking about the farm workers, right? People are talking restitution in terms of the farmers, and quite a number of things that could benefit people. But where are they placing us as farm workers? And farm workers are able to say this is the land struggle, because we don't think and we don't feel we are part of that narrative, because we are collected by the truck in the morning and it takes us farm. In the evening, we continue to be alienated from the land after working, then the very same truck will take us home. And at 6 o'clock, we must wake up and be ready. So when people talk about reform, what about us, farm workers who are staying in urban areas, who only go to these places to work? So I'm saying Inyanda National Movement have started in a very serious way to say this land question, you understand it to be a political question. Therefore, how do you make sure that we discuss this convergency, we bring together these experiences in order to bridge the gap, to have a very formidable and build a huge organization that can challenge land issue. The last point that I could make, the same with the housing, to demonstrate and illustrate this point of understanding land question as a political question that Comrade Mesha talks about, that you also mentioned. Because one of the issues is how do you make sure that the land is, that the markets don't determine the land anymore? Whether you look at back, whether you look at Durban, whether you look at in any other place where there have been evictions, it's either the land is owned by a municipality, or it's either the land, as you are saying, it's a prime land. Then, therefore, people have no right to occupation. So the land, the housing in urban areas, the housing struggles is also the land question struggles, because I mean what we have, it's a neo-apartheid spatial planning that the ANC have not broken it. Like the ANC did not break the governance in the rural areas, that you continue to have these chiefs who are corrupt, who are very undemocratic. It's just the perpetuation of colonialism and apartheid. So that's even the RDP housing built, they are built at the peripheries, as if people do not have the right to the city. As the point that I was making, because the land is market determined. We talk of the prime land, this and that land, as so if they build these struggles will only be built in the peripheries. So we also understand our struggles in the town, the housing struggles and the struggles against these service deliveries to be the land struggles. It is for this reason that Unemployed People's Movement, as an urban movement, felt it was necessary for it, through the discussions, that it ought to be part of Inyanda National Land Movement. Our struggle is very intricate with the struggle of the rural people, and these struggles we ought to join forces, and we ought to join hands. We ought to struggle side by side. So the question of convergence and of uniting the struggles is quite important, and land is very central in uniting the struggles.
I'm sure you are. You have concluded your presentation. I have some follow-up questions, but I'm going to put on screen a very interesting question that comes from Stayeni. Sta says that is there a relationship between the three movements that are here in terms of membership and strategy? So is LPM Unemployed People's Movement and Inyanda kind of share strategy, membership, and all of that? Mercia, do you want to come in to react to that?
So I was cut off for all the time that Ayanda spoke, but just to say that the UPM is a member of Inyanda, and we have a relationship. Parts of the LPM, I don't think we've had conversation with the LPM for a long time, because perhaps I'm not sure if they have a relationship in Limpopo with the farmers movement, Mopani farmers movement that exists there. I think it's important that platforms are created for sharing generally. whether people are part of organizations or not. These are important spaces, but at this stage, there's no relationship, as it were, with LPM. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Marcia. I'm going to now put on Ruth Hall. Ruth Hall would like to know if, I mean, she says there is not only an urban-rural divide, but also political and ideological divides among land activist movements, differences of substance and strategy. How do the speakers see this? Let's see if Themba would like to react to this question. Themba, over to you.
No, thanks, Bo. I will also be responding to the previous question. Yes, we also be in contact with. We're also in contact with the Mopani Farmers Association. When we've got even meetings of the staff we meet, we even visit them when there are some activities to see how they're doing. So I mean, like in reality, it's true. I mean, when people are in urban areas, they think that those that are in rural areas, that it is their own matters, and those that are in rural areas, they think those that are in urban areas their own matters. And also, yes, there is a political divide and political divide in inland activism. Like example, I explained earlier that I joined this movement while I was very young as a youth, and youth want to see actions, and most of what we do in our activities is to policy meetings and all the stuff like that. So yes, there's too much divide. I mean, like there's too much different in our approach to this land struggle.
Thanks, Themba. Ayanda, Marcia, would you like to say something on that question?
Of course, absolutely. I won't refer to us only as an ideological divide, but also there are remnants. I mean, we've got to have a very honest conversation, and we've got to be very honest and frank in these discussions and conversations. And most of the time, the reason these movements would not be able to come together, like UPM, maybe another movement in Port Harcourt, with these movements, the reason also that we are not growing and we are not making any impact. There's a lot of sectarianism. Let's be honest. There's a lot of partisan and there's a lot of gatekeeping that Comrade Misha always makes an emphasis that we must be able to get rid or to defeat the mentality of gatekeeping in our movements. That's number one. But also, I accepted the point by Comrade Ruth, Professor Pussy, in terms of geographical distance in how this movement come together. We continue to struggle there. It could also be a problem of resources. But also, I think that speaks to the conversations that we are having currently, right? How do we converge the struggle? If we are able to defeat sectarianism, the partisan, the gatekeeping, we mature enough to the struggle is bigger than us. I think once we reach even the issue of geographical factor, it's something that will be able, if there's a will, I believe it's something that will be able to defeat. I mean, look here, unemployed movement is in Eastern Cape in Makanga. You've got Mabopane land movement in Limpopo that is there. I mean, you've got these movements under Inyanda National Land Movement working together. I mean, look at the difference. And the question would be, then why the unemployed movement with an organization like that is here next to it in Hanki? I'm just making an example. Where there's a will, there's enough radicalism, enough honesty, I mean, decency and commitment. I think some of these issues, we are able to defeat them.
So if I can continue on that question.
Go ahead.
I think the point that is been raised by Ruth is an important consideration, but I think it's not the only one. So I do think there are differences, perhaps differences in strategy and ideology, as has been said. But I also think it's how movements are built and who speaks on behalf of the movement and the role of the leadership of the movements, and also the role of NGOs. I think this is quite an important issue that should not be, that we shouldn't, what's the word? That we should address head on, because often I think we've tried to argue that the movements of the land must be built from the bottom up, and that it must be there in the interest of the rural poor, the landless, etc. They must take the struggles forward. It cannot be top down from NGOs, who speaks on behalf of who, etc. And I'm sitting here as an NGO person, but that doesn't mean we cannot be critical. And I think this is perhaps at the heart of what people build movements for. Are we building a land movement that's going to act in their own interest, or are we building a land association so that we as the NGO can survive and have a means of supporting ourselves, etc. And I think this is quite, for me, where some of the gatekeepers are as well. How the blockages, how the obstacles of getting, of overcoming attempts at building common movements often take place. And there have been a number of these in our history, from the time there was an attempt to build, with the National Land Committee, to build the landless people's movement. All these have been attempts to build alarm. There have been a number of these initiatives nationally. And often, if you begin to analyze and you begin to look at what the blockages are, we have something that Star was involved in recently called Chinchimakaya, and it was also an attempt to create conditions for associations to work together. But you find these obstacles, and I think it's for me the biggest blockage is the role of some of these NGOs, all of the NGOs, in fact. And until we have a different approach, we are going to continue to see the divides, and we are going to continue to be operating in small pockets. And we, as long also as NGOs speak on behalf of and for rural people and occupy space, and not have a role of supporting people to articulate and find their own voice, we are going to continue to see movements fragile, full of fatigue, and just very localized. And those are some of the key issues that I think we must overcome. Yeah.
Thank you, Mersha. There is a question that was posed by Emily Schaffer. This is a very localized question because it concerns a Western Cape kind of political party. So Emily says, response to recent rulings among homeowners in the Western Cape has been fearful, and the DA, this is the Democratic Alliance, has called on them to push back. How realistic is their fear that they will be next? for instance, next occupiers taking their homes. Mercia, you are from the Western Cape, and probably this question can be responded by you. But Ayanda and Themba, you are of course welcome to say something if you have reflections and thoughts.
Well, I think for a long time, so I'm very critical of the fact that our government, the ruling party, has feared to reimagine our cities, and all the housing that we see is in the same townships and extension. There's no attempt to overcome the apartheid divide, and that suits the DA. That suits the middle classes, not only in the Western Cape, throughout the country. And I think for me, where there are fears, let there be fears. But I think we need to break down the apartheid spatial divides. And unless we build strong linkages in the urban areas, we are going to see greater pushbacks, because it suits. It's like the ANC protecting commercial agriculture. It's the same policy. They're always pushing back, and they're always on the back foot. And there is never an attempt to overcome the historical legacy that we're sitting with.
Thank you, Mercia. You say, in fact, is the same policy, and I think this is what I also said in my introductory remarks, that the state land policy in South Africa, regardless of which party is in power, is pretty much neoliberal. There is a question here from Ashley Fishhoff. Ashley is asking, where do peri-urban land rights struggles and movements fall with regard to the convergence of urban and rural struggle? I think some of this was mentioned, but I think it's a very important question to elaborate more on it. Themba, you have been silent for quite a while. Do you want to say something on this? Over to you.
If we don't address the issue of rural areas, that's what is affecting the urban areas. So this should be a convergence, because the more people struggle for land, employment, and all the stuff like that in rural areas, that's where people went to migrate to urban areas. And that's where the convergence can emerge about the struggle. Because when people arrive in urban areas, the first thing they need, unlike us in rural areas, is residential sites. So the movement the convergence can be made through that, because they are interlinked, even though they might seem not related, but they are all interlinked.
Good, thanks, Themba. I see here some questions. I will put another question that comes from Star Yeni, where Star says, given the diverse nature of members of the movements represented here today, for instance, farm workers, small-scale farmers, unemployed youth, women, men, what are the implications for organizing? I also think that this topic has been touched a little bit, but Ayanda, do you want to elaborate more on this?
Yeah. Well, I concur with you. We have tried to. I think, to me, what's important, what's key, is that we ought to understand that the crux of the struggles in our country, and I guess elsewhere in the world, has always been about the land question. As the speakers, including yourself, have demonstrated very clearly that the land question is a political question. Whether you are in an urban area organizing around housing, as we have seen, pushing against evictions, as we have seen, pushing against repression, whether you are in a rural area, taking struggle against the undemocratic chiefs, whether it's a struggle of farm workers and farm dwellers. But if you look at it, at the bottom, it's a land questions. And the sooner, I mean, there are, as Comrade Mesh was saying, there are impediments that we are not able to unite the struggles. And I think, to me, Inyanda National Movement does offer us an opportunity to unite the struggles, to bring the struggles together. I also want to say something on what Comrade Mesha said, the role of NGOs. But I think we need NGOs that are able to support the struggles. It's okay to have an NGO that can play an advisory role to the government on policy matters, to serve on the panel. But to enforce that change, the advisor, I think you need a movement. You need a movement from below. I think it is for this reason that Inyanda National TCOE realized that indeed a land movement is important in this country. A land movement is what is needed in this country. So I think, to me, what we need to do is just make sure that we continue to build organically. I think there will come a point where all these movements will come to realization that we need to converge the struggles. There have been attempts. If you remember social movements, there were attempts. You had at some point what you call social movement in Daba. This has always been an attempt to build something organic, to build something from below that is able to unite, to bring the struggles together so that you are able to make an impact. But also, in this discussion, the last point that I want to make, in this discussion, we must also look at the politics of the left, why the left has suffered what I called ultimate defeat, as we have seen. But it's another discussion that we also must be able to, because what we are discussing is also the defeat of the left in our country, ultimate defeat of the left country, and why the left is so weak. And we have made some of the issues, okay, there's an NGO factor, there's a gatekeeping factor, there's a factor of these movements that are apart, and also of not realizing that they are struggle. The land question is something that can bring them together, is something that they can unite all of them. So I'm saying those are some of the issues. Yeah, I mean, that will be my 2 cents.
Perhaps to add to that point he's making.
Sure.
And this is a very critical point for me, a lesson from Latin America. In South Africa, we don't have enough scholar activists. We don't have scholars who are studying and working on land and agrarian issues, etc., that are in movements, that are part of movements, as you would see in the MST or as you would see in La Via Campesina, etc. There seems to be quite a divide. And for me, this is part of it, the point, the weakness of the movement, where we are not, as scholar activists in service, part of movements, helping to work with movements so that we strengthen the political nature of the movements. That it's not, and this I think is another weakness, that many of the little land associations and groups and farmer associations across the country, for me, are perhaps they know land policy, but they're not political in their actions. And I think we need to politicize a lot more the struggle for land, because in this country, we have seen through the policies of the ruling party, through the amount, the shrinking budgets of land reform and rural development, etc., that the issue of land is not an issue that is central to the ruling party. It's a sub-issue. It only gets drawn out when they need votes and they need to politicize the election campaigns, as they did with the expropriation bill. Got everybody talking, and for what purpose? So I think there's a need for reimagining how we build politically and how people join into this campaign of building, that it's not only for some to build and for others to sit on the fence. Thanks.
Thank you, Mercy. In fact, 3 weeks ago, we hosted a webinar, a plus webinar, where we were discussing about the difficult relationship between academics and movements and activists. I recommend you all to watch it. There is a question here from Polly that I would like you to react. Polly says, land so intertwined, landscape, water, power, capital, gender, technology, how to break neo-apartheid partial planning. And here Polly quotes Ayanda, and structures. Can the three movements build or capture power together? Who would like to react to that? Themba, Ayanda.
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, that's why I say that I'm also involved in slow food. You know, this thing is interrelated. When you talk about land, must talk about capital, must talk about gender, must talk about technology. So this is the way in which when you talk about land, for what? That is the problem. That is the question that we should answer, because it's also interconnected. So another thing that I want to talk about is that LPM is part of the Landness, which is a movement that some civil organization, all the time, maybe farmers organizations, farm dwellers organization, or different types of organization are part of, which is also another platform that we are using to as a policy, multi-stakeholder policy platform. So those are the things that we are trying to make sure that we build or capture power together. And I believe this can be done through also with Enyanda Land Movement and others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Themba. I want to ask you this question and also invite you to wrap up, since we have a few minutes left. I'm not from South Africa, but I've seen some sort of provincialism dominating politics in this country. By engaging, for instance, with the C19 People's Coalition, I could sense some sorts of those dynamics. People talking about we, the Western Cape, we, the Gauteng, we, the Eastern Cape. Isn't that one of the reasons why a national white movement is not given birth? And on reflecting to that, I would also invite all the panelists to also say some concluding remarks as we march towards the end of the webinar. Let's use the same order. Marcia, please.
So I think it's not simply provincialism. I think there are other questions, and for me, one of the reasons, the importance of building a movement like Enyanda is the fact that we can overcome the racial divides that exist. So you have in the Eastern Cape, and I'm always fighting with Ayanda about this. I'm saying, you live in Grahamstown, you are organizing in Grahamstown. There's a colored township across the road there. Why are you not mobilizing in those areas as well? So I think national movements help to bring people from across these spaces into a common space. They deal with issues of provincialism. They deal with issues of racism, racial divides. They deal with issues of labor. We have to deal with all these questions when we are in a common movement. It isn't always easy, but I think it's the national character can help us to begin to see ourselves as oppressed people, as exploited rural masses, rather than boxed into groups of marginalized people. Thanks.
Thank you, Mersha. Ayanda?
Well, I think the reality of the matter, as I've said, I mean, some of your questions speaks to why the left has really has suffered a defeat in this country. I mean, if you take a look at Polokwane example, the that were black, the 100% Zulu boy that were coming from the hills of the Xhosa Nostra within the ruling party. This speaks to tribalism and the question of racism in this country. It's a factor that we cannot deny. The neo-fascism, the politics that are anti-Indian in this country by some of the leading activists. This hatred against Indians in this in our country by leading activists. This speaks to the politics of tribalism in this country, racism in this country, of ethnicism in this country. But also at some point, we don't take this politics seriously. We think the politics of race are more important than the politics of class. And times we think the politics of class are more important than the politics of race, and which I think it's a debate for another day. Which I think to me, and they are equally important. So the question of struggles and the rural struggles, to think no, we are better in the urban than the rural struggles. So I'm saying all those things are important. You're correct. I mean, the point that Comrade Misha always challenges us, that there's a colored community, so-called colored community, just next to us. Why are we not going there and organizing in that community? Because we belong to one class and we are a working class. So things are quite important. They inform our politics. I think that's why we are forever achieving, not been able. There have been attempts to build something better, something liberatory, and the reason we have short forward, it's because of the questions that we are raising. Up until we are quite honest and not move from a of defense and say these are the issues that confront us. How do we deal with this question in a more serious, in a more honest, and in a robust way? Yeah.
Thank you, Ayanda. It seems that Themba is back. Themba, would you like to make some concluding remarks?
Yeah, what I can say is that the land struggle is too much. They must forgive us about this load shedding. When it goes somewhere, then the network changes. You know, I mean, in reality, when you talk about provincialism, yes, it is the system that was is coming from is the follow-up system that has been created by apartheid. So which is continuous, which it's not easy to change. So it does exist. We can't run away from that. So it's something that we need to deal with it as social movement, as NGOs, in order to have one struggle together.
On that note, let me thank all of you for your presence and the viewers for the audience. The next week plus webinar will be looking at securing land tenure rights, dissecting the upgrading of land rights amendment bill. We'll be honored to have you all again. Till then, stay safe and let's join or support the struggles of the landless, the unemployed, the exploited workers, and the poor at large. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.